I want to share with you a story that I think is really interesting and very illustrative of the power of data in storytelling. A few years ago, some scientists decided that they wanted to see the impact of data in convincing people of the efficacy of a specific drug. And so they put in front of their test subjects one version that was a paragraph about this new drug. And for the that was the control group, and for our test subjects, they received a similar version of the text, but they also saw uh, many different charts that were related to the study itself. What was interesting to find for the scientists was that 97% of those who saw the text plus the graph said that they believed that the drugs worked, compared with 68% who saw the text only. 97 versus 68%. And what was interesting to me was that the charts that they showed added absolutely zero information. And yet they were very convincing just by conveying the sense that there was specific concrete data that was available to prove the point. To the point that Nancy made earlier, this kind of information is convincing to us because we have this natural bias towards wanting to believe that data equals more in depth information, more specificity. And in fact, the reason why we want to infuse our content with data is because of these four things. First, it adds that credibility, right? It demonstrates to our audience that what we are telling them is based on specific information or authority. It makes it relatable because it allows the audience to anchor this specific information, benchmark against it, and think about it in comparison to other things. It makes it concrete. It makes it easy for somebody to understand that there is a specific amount or a specific quantity or specific scale of information. And finally, it makes it memorable. When we are talking about behavioral economics, one of the things that always comes out of it is this idea of heuristics, the idea of shortcuts that our mind uses specifically to make it easier for us to process all the information that comes at us. And when it comes to data, it is a really great example of something that is a very easy shortcut for your mind to hang on to. In fact, I want you to think about your own experiences for just a moment. I bet you that you have had a conversation in the last week or so where you're talking to a friend or family member and you say, I heard this statistic somewhere, and that you share a statistic and you can't even remember what the source of that statistic was. But that statistic helped you to remember the news story, the resource, or the information better because it gave you a concrete number around which you could hang your hat. That is the power of data. The challenge that we have as marketers is even when we know that data can be such a powerful tool, oftentimes you may find that in the internal reports that you receive from your colleagues or even the materials that you're sending out to your clients or your customers, we're not actually leveraging that data. And that is the big opportunity that I want to talk about today. Because when we leverage the data that we own as an organization or have available to us, we become more powerful within both our content marketing and our social media marketing because we are leveraging these four different dimensions. So let me go ahead and show you some of the different kinds of data that you could collect or identify, what data you should collect or identify. The first category is capitalizing on trends. So when I talk about capitalizing on trends, the example that I often give to folks is the Edelman Trust Barometer. So each year, Edelman, the big consultancy and PR company, they publish this report where they talk about trust and its various aspects on a global scale. So what they're really talking about at a broad, high level is all of the different ways that trust is impacting industries from journalism to finance to NGOs to government bodies. And that kind of broad spectrum content is really valuable because it gives people a sense of the world. So that is one key bucket of data that is valuable to collect because it creates these opportunities for people to have that broader understanding of the world. The second major bucket is, of course, understanding competition or the landscape. I think that this is particularly important when you are in a B2B industry, but still important even if you are in a B2B, B2C space. Um, Companies including Ernst& Young, EY, or Zillow actually do a really great job of pulling out that data from the research that they do and share that out in these reports of here's what's happening within this specific space or industry, or here's what's happening amongst a particular subsection of our industry. And I think that that can be really valuable. And the third, and sometimes I think one of the most creative, is what I call benchmarking norms. All of us want to know what other people like us are doing and what success looks like, right? In fact, this isn't just in B2B industries. My favorite example of this is actually OkCupid, the dating website. What they have recognized is that people want to understand what is normal within their space. What does success look like when you're dating? And so they have aggregated their data and pulled out some really fascinating information that is very, very interesting, very engaging, and very talkable for their audience. In addition to an organization like OkCupid, another great example of this would be the CMO survey, which is published by Deloitte, the American Marketing Association, and Duke University. The CMO survey goes out to thousands of CMOs across many, many different industries and asks them a variety of different questions around what they spend, what they think are the concerns that are coming up for the next year, and what are the different areas where they've invested time and energy. And you can see that, again, the goal here is to benchmark what the norms are, what are the behaviors of others, your peers, and therefore make it easier for your audience to understand what they should be doing. What are the opportunities? What are they missing out on? And what are they doing right? Each of those different kinds of validation is really valuable from a motivational standpoint. Here's the thing. When we generate better insights, we are able to create better storytelling. And better storytelling in our content marketing and in our social media marketing and in our various different digital marketing touchpoints equals better results because it is more likely that you will retain that share of mind for your audience, build that credibility and that desire to work with you as a brand authority, and also that desire to interact and engage with your content on an ongoing basis. So, what are some of the different ways that brands have leveraged these various types of content in their own customer journeys? I want to show you some examples from both large and small companies that will really illustrate what it is that I'm talking about here. Our friends at Rival IQ are a social media measurement company, and they have produced for several years different social media engagement reports that are specific to various key industries that are major areas of business for them. So, this is an example from them, the higher education social media engagement report. And this is a great example of a top of funnel piece of content that leverages the data that they have within their own client databases. They aggregate it so it's anonymized, but it gives you a picture of that specific industry. And it benchmarks what this normal behavior is within this particular industry because that really piques the audience interest, right? If you're within the higher education space and you see that this report is available, you're going to go and download it. You're going to be really excited to get this gated content because you want to know, are you doing well? Are you doing poorly? And how well or poorly? And what are other people actually doing in this space? So again, thinking about those norms at the top of funnel, this is a really great way to generate leads and get people in the door. At the mid funnel, you should be really collecting data that helps you to make your case when it comes to selling through your particular product. This example is from Clear Voice, and what they have done for the last several years is a one question, open ended survey that they send out to thousands of marketers. 2,800 marketers answered in this past year. And it's just one single question, which is what is your biggest challenge with content? And it's, like I said, open ended, so people can just type whatever they want. And then what Clear Voice does is an analysis of the trends when they analyze all the words. What are the top 10 different areas of concern for folks? what are the percentages within them, and what are the subcategories within them. And why they do that is to help collect data that actually sells their clients on the fact that they probably need additional support, because Clear Voice, what they provide as a service, is actually helping people write their content. And what they have found in the last several years as the top trend happens to be, coincidentally or not, production. That production is the major challenge that people have. They just don't have enough bandwidth to create all of the resources that they've actually been tasked with creating. So you can see that by collecting this particular set of data and analyzing it and cross-cutting it so that they can look at those different trends, they can really tell a story about why others like you might be interested in getting additional support, because a lot of people are facing this issue with bandwidth. And then when it comes to the bottom of the funnel, what I want you to think about is, how do you generate data with your audience's final hesitations in mind? So, as we know, once you are towards the bottom of the funnel, we always have the challenge that we need to get people to say that final yes. So I have two examples here for you. The first on the left is from a small business client of ours, which is a co-working space business in New York City. And you can see that this is data that came from their annual survey. 98% of members would recommend BCL to a friend or colleague. And this is a question that we very deliberately put into each of those surveys, because what we know is that at the end of that customer journey for their particular customers, the key question that is on folks' minds is is this place for me? Do other people like me work out of this space? So having that kind of third party validation can be really valuable. Of course, we're using things like testimonials, etc., but this data point puts it in really concrete terms that makes it feel less like anecdote and more like inevitability. And that is a huge opportunity for this particular brand. The example on the right is from Modern Campus, and you can see that it says 90% of higher ed websites are ineffective at driving enrollment, according to new research. So download this report to see how your school stacks up. Now, this is a really interesting way of using data, because it is ostensibly at a point that you might say to me, Zontee, well, this seems like it's really more like top of funnel because it's really content you're generating. That is true. However, what I'm trying to do is get people over the hump of downloading this particular document, right? And over the hump is, why should I give my valuable information? What is so important on the other side of it that I'm going to give you my data, right? And for this particular audience, when the number is so high, 90% of higher ed websites are basically ineffective, well, then it's pretty unlikely, right, that my particular organization is going to be in that 10%. And so it makes me feel curious to know, well, what are the things that we're doing right and wrong? And yeah, I guess I should give my information over. In each of these cases, we're creating these opportunities for people to hang on to that information and really confirm the things that they might already be feeling. Now, what's important for you to keep in mind is that in each of these examples, I've given you a different kind of use case for how we generate this research, right? In the first example with Rival IQ, I talked about how we can aggregate our client data in order to find these trends, analyze them, and then talk about what we found. In the second example of Clear Voice, we're using a broad survey of people out in the field and then using that data to help tell a really particular story. And on this page, we have an example that's a survey that's specifically of current clients. And in the Modern Campus example, we're using research that comes from a third party. In all of these different cases, we're being really proactive about thinking about how we can infuse our data and being really deliberate at generating the stories that are worth telling, that relate to our brand and our goals, our marketing goals. Now, in this last example, I shared that Modern Campus was using third-party research. And I think that this is really important, because this is a question that I get all the time from small businesses, right? If I don't have the capacity to run a survey or analyze data in a deep way, or there's some hesitancy within my organization, what else can we do? And actually, whether you're small or large, you can absolutely be very proactive and train your team, both your marketing team as well as your analysis team to look for the information that will be really helpful in storytelling. So look to your industry and trade organizations as a great resource for third party research that really actively adds credence to your content. Second, look at software and MarTech companies. I often will point to HubSpot, CoSchedule, RivalIQ, which I mentioned, and Pinterest, which I'll give you a little bit more information about in just a minute, as some great examples. Pinterest, particularly, is so interesting if you are in a B2C space, whether you are in travel, fashion, lifestyle, or any area that is very trend driven. Pinterest actually does an annual review of all of the trends that are seen in their data in terms of things that are rising and things that are falling in interest and search volumes. And that is so valuable for starting to direct folks towards content that they might not have otherwise considered. Think about the Pantone annual color of the year, right? That really drives a lot of conversation around products. If you say and identify that, Pinterest is suddenly seeing a huge rise in, let's say, like chartreuse things for the year, and you are in a B2C space, it's a really an opportunity for you to not only give the data point, but then really tell a story around that information and what that means for your consumer. And then the final is, of course, research organizations like Pew, AARP Research, which is a client, Gallup, Harris, Nielsen. All of these different organizations are producing a lot of information from a demographic, a psychographic point of view, and that can be really valuable in your storytelling. Again, you probably have fantastic content that is out there already, but your opportunity is to use your data and the data of others to enhance the hook so that you get more engagement and more value out of that content. Now, let's go ahead and look at how that can actually be presented within a social space. So you may use graphics like the one on screen, which is actually an animated graphic through a tool called Flourish, which shows these trends over time of different fuel types and renewable energy. And what I really like about this kind of graphic for storytelling with data is that it infuses narrative by using data plus time. How have things changed over the last couple of years? And I think that this is something that is often really helpful in a context setting point of view. So that's definitely one great way to really create highly engaging content within a social space. Look at what has changed over time. What does that mean for you? What does that mean for what's coming down the pipe? The second is using infographics to make key takeaways or really fascinating data points pop and be really highly valuable to a particular audience. This is an example from our client at AARP Research. They are currently in the middle of the release of their Fraud Frontiers data, which I would definitely recommend that you check out because it's a fascinating look at all of the different factors that impact why people experience different kinds of fraud and scams. And there, what you'll see if you look at it in social media right now is that we have produced lots and lots of different kinds of infographics, and lots of different fascinating data points have been pulled out of the research and infused into the social media because they become the things that not only do people remember, but they really interact with and they actually engage with on social media. And of course, that is really helpful from an algorithmic point of view. And in fact, this final example here in terms of sparking conversation is from HubSpot, and it really does look to start a conversation using these fascinating data points. In this case, you'll see that the data point is a third party data point. 62% of consumers say that they are more likely to buy if they can view customer videos and photos according to Bazaar Voice. Now, this is an interesting data point, and what they've done is added a point of view. We have to wonder if this has something to do with consumers being able to see themselves using the product or service. And then they have opened up the conversation to their audience. What do you think? Now you can see that this is on LinkedIn, and this is a great example of where we can use data to really spark that conversation that is then valuable for engagement because we know that the LinkedIn algorithm is very highly conversation based. The more people are commenting back and forth, the more this particular post is going to get views, and then that becomes a positive cycle. So whenever we can use our data to create these points of what I'm going to call controversy, we have an opportunity to again game the system a little bit and helped our content to be more valuable in the social media space where conversation is so important. Now, as you were thinking about your data and storytelling, one of the questions that I get all the time is how should we present our stories, right? And now this is a little bit like what Kenneth was saying with Nancy, right? Every organization is different. So I don't have one hard and fast rule for you, but I do have a series of thoughts on how you can form and test your hypotheses. What I would love for you to do as part of your overall planning process is to really think through what we believe our audience is going to need in terms of data, what they'll react to, what they'll feel strongly about, for or against, and then test those hypotheses to see, can we actually get them to engage with it? Does this seem to drive click-throughs? Does this help our conversions? What is that one compelling fact that will make them go, ooh, I have to find out more about that thing? Some of the different ways that we can look at our hypotheses is first to make sure that we are proactively tagging and tracking them based on these different conjecture, right? The more we can be organized about identifying our hypotheses and then looking for the data to actually support our points of view and help us organize what content is actually being pushed out there, the better off we are. This is an example from Rival IQ, which again is a social media tracking tools that really helps you to look against not only yourself but your competitors. So you can see here we're looking at different types of content by format. We're really looking at what that engagement ends up being like based on the hypotheses. Here's an example where we might be asking our team, should we use more quote graphics in our social channels? Are we using the right kind of content to help support this particular storytelling around our data? And in order to better understand that, we're going to use this kind of analysis of where are people really engaging with the content? Do they do better when we have a quote with a pull out number? Do they do better when we, have a graphic that is a chart? What is the kind of content that actually gets that engagement? We might also look at different kinds of visuals in driving that engagement or discussion. So this is an example from another client, and you can see that they have a very specific color palette in their imagery, but certain images are going to stand out more than others. And this is an opportunity for us to do some testing around our hypotheses. Do certain types of visuals drive that engagement or discussion? And we may also want to think about how are we using our data to identify those themes that our audience is interested in learning more about. So what are the different topics within our storytelling that actually seem to spark that conversation and really drive people forward? So should we talk about our marketing tactics, marketing strategy or tactics? And this is using a tool called SparkToro that I think is a fantastic uh, tool for social listening and analyses of specific audiences within different social media channels based on their interests. So certainly if that's a challenge that you have from the point of view of what data you are actually collecting right now, that's an opportunity for you to use this particular tool. And this is, again, a great place to get third party data that your team could analyze and then be able to tell a more interesting story around. So I think that there's also an opportunity there. The other things that I want you to think about when it comes to data and storytelling are really around how do you scale this? So there are a lot of different kinds of content that are out there. And sometimes what we hear from our clients is that they don't have enough time in the day to actually be able to put the right kind of information in front of their audience. So we like tools like Celtra, which allow you to input all of your different kind of content elements, and then the tool itself will actually allow you to select different versions of it based on some preset rules, so that you can pop out many different versions and then actually scale the testing, especially on the paid side, to help with that storytelling and really help you to make sure that you are creating content that really resonates, that is not only providing that hook, but also providing the kind of format that really engages with your audience. And we want you to think about that not only from the visual standpoint, but also from the copy standpoint. So here's another hypothesis that we might want to test around: do features or benefits perform better from our social advertising standpoint? And the tool that I have on screen is called Copy AI. This is really aimed at small businesses, and it is a system that generates great copy in many different kinds of themes. The example that I have on screen, I believe, is blog content, but it does great social content, and many different versions of the copy that you might have around topics as well. So again, that's an opportunity for you to scale the how of how we specifically showcase the content, from our storytelling point of view. So again, today what we've really looked at is um, what kind of data we need to be creating. And in this particular case, we need to identify the data that will really resonate with our audience, make sure that how we're looking at that, we're generating the analyses, not just the information, right? So we can survey, we can mine that existing customer data, or we can explain others' data. But the goal here is to deepen the understanding of the information that's in front of the audience. When we are showcasing our data, we need to focus on that storytelling itself, right? What's the therefore? What does it mean to you? And why does it help you to move yourself forward? And finally, you need to develop those hypotheses that shape how you tell your stories, so that you continue to move your audience forward and speak to them in the ways that are most relevant to them. Um, Thank you again for allowing me to close out day two of DigiMarCon. If you'd like to learn more about how you can tell better stories within the digital space, I hope that you'll connect with me. I'm at Zonteho on Twitter and LinkedIn. My website is zonteho.com, and my company is Media Volery, and we're at mediavolery.com. And I look forward to taking your questions.
That came from the audience. First one says, how do I help management trust more in data when they haven't relied on data in the past? This is a great question because this is the gut versus data question, which it's hard enough for a lot of people to adapt to understanding data. But you have a lot of senior leaders who've been going down a path for a long time who've only trusted their gut.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this question. So I think that there are two things that I would definitely recommend. One is, when people have trusted their gut for a long time, there are often two reasons, right? They're either um, skeptical of the information that is out there, or they don't believe that the information that's actually out there is available, and therefore they think that the anecdotes actually help them to get where they need to go, right? So if you come from a more traditional industry where that happens to be the case, I have found that it is really valuable to first use data to validate, right? So these are the things that we believe are true. Here's how the data backs that up. Here's what's true that we already know. But then here's how the data adds nuance, especially around that benchmarking piece. Because oftentimes, when you say to somebody, hey, let me tell you what's going on with other folks, they're interested. Now, there are certainly leaders who are going to say, well, we're already the top of our game within our particular industry. Our industry is a little old fashioned, so we don't want to look backwards at what our competitors are doing. Okay, that's fair. Look to the brands who are really leading in other categories that those leaders love and trust, and look at the analyses around their performance. I promise you, there are a lot of really interesting case studies where people have actually shared their performance metrics
Mm.
around different kinds of campaigns. And so, if you can say, let's say they really love Nike, you say, look at what Nike is able to achieve by changing a couple of things in these areas. They were able to achieve, like 150% growth in this particular campaign because they did this, this, and this. Well, now you've made a really strong play for why we should actually be moving in that direction by aligning with the things that they already believe. So I think that it's that idea of validate and then push further.
Yeah. So this next question, I love this. This is a cynical marketer asking this question, and I love it. So, how do you keep your data? Data can be manipulated to tell any kind of story. How do you keep your
Absolutely.
data focused on telling the story rather than being manipulated to fill in the gaps for a narrative? And that's a very, very interesting question that can push yourself towards some biases with the wrong way you look at data.
Absolutely, and I'm gonna answer this two ways because I think that there's an honest version here, and
Yeah.
then we'll talk a little bit about the ideal version. So the honest version is that in the case that I'm talking about, right, I'm really talking about how do we use data for marketing. So there is going to be bias, right? The whole conjecture that I'm putting in front of you is that I want you to proactively think about how do we source the data that helps us with the narrative that actually drives our marketing goals. And so there is going to be some bias there. I'm going to admit that up front.
Fair.
However, I do believe that it is important for us organizationally to also say we are not going to manipulate what is actually there. I don't believe in like cutting the data in really fine ways. You can go out there and say, we want to ask these questions because we believe we need to know X, Y, and Z because we believe that's what's going to matter to our audience. But I think that if you start getting into, we're going to throw out this data and we're going to take away that, and that's really manipulating the data. The way that I think that you get away from that is to have some ground rules for what are the ethics around our analyses on a regular basis. That's number one. And number two, in the longer version of this talk, when I give it as a workshop, we actually spend a lot of time talking about how do we actually empower data analytics teams to take on this work. And the reason we do it that way is because my goal is not for you to have like an assigned person who does just marketing analysis per se, right? Unless you're Edelman or McKinsey or one of those organizations where they're really producing research, you probably don't have the bandwidth to have an entire person who's only doing research for the specific purpose of marketing. So if you're doing this with your data analyst who is already looking for the truth in your numbers so that you can do your work better, then I think your opportunity is to make sure that they have the support they need to be really critical and also really proactive in saying this is the hypothesis, it turned out to be false, and that's fine, and that they are not punished for that, right? So if you're creating the guidelines for success for that person within your organization, I think that you will find that you will also be more honest. Again, you could get as manipulative as you want with data, but I think that the key question that I want you to ask is there a real value in that? If it turns out that you're saying to some people that this thing is wrong, you're just going to get disproven later. And my goal for you in telling your story with data is actually to become more authoritative, right? Because Andy Crestodina, a great marketing consultant of Orbit Media, said this best, that data and surveys can be a really fantastic way to generate PR coverage and get more people to pay attention to the thought leadership of your organization. So you want to be right. You don't want to be wrong.
Great point. So, last question. What advice do you have for folks whose organizations are shy about sharing their data? Which, if they're not shy, then I'm worried about them, having worked in big data. But that's a great
Right.
question.
Yeah. So I think that oftentimes what people are afraid of is giving away information that our competitors could use.
Hmm.
Now, listen, a lot of us have a lot of information that, quite frankly, is absolutely of no use to our competitors, but is very interesting to our audience because what our audience wants to understand is other people like them. So you don't have to give anything that's identifiable or that necessarily gives specifics. You can often give numbers in terms of growth, right? Growth rates are always really valuable to folks. So I think that organizationally, you do have to do a little bit of selling around this idea of, hey, our goal is thought leadership, higher rates of engagement, more interactivity, and more memorability of our content. If we can do a pilot that helps to prove that we can achieve those goals through sharing a little bit of information that is aggregated, anonymized, and again, specifically interesting to our audience, but not our competitors, because our competitors will have similar kinds of information, then I think that you can actually prove the results and then get people more and more on board. This is really a situation where I think you have to um, boil the frog slowly, right? So it doesn't jump out of the pot. I think the slower you can kind of introduce the different ways that the content can be really effective, the more people buy into it. If you start with a small pilot program and then do more and more content that's driving in that direction, you can really shift your entire content marketing and social media marketing program in this general direction over time.